August 10th, 2023, Titans Battalion devlog, the inclusion of chess and chess variants. So, let's just jump right in. I have realized a few things. I've decided to write all of my author notes for the game into this, and I actually want to talk about all of these things. First of all, our system, if you're not familiar, that allows us to play these chess variants against each other is a territory and battlefield system. And we're still using these old 3D assets to show it. But essentially, the battlefield is a central section of the board that's either 9 or 10 squares wide, usually, that you then attach your army's board to a section of it. So for the chess army, that's that little 8x3 here with the chess army attached, and you can go from there. Now, what we've realized is, our initial solution for things like shogi and this territory system, shogi's played on a 9x9 board, chess on an 8x8, and that means that there's a mismatch between the sizes, which causes some columns of pieces to get stuck. And initially, we're just like, okay, we'll just let the pieces that can get stuck move sideways. And we used that for the last 4 years. And in the last few weeks, we tried other solutions, particularly something called battlefield charges, which allowed you to only do those sideways movements a certain number of times in a game. And then once you were out of the charges, you couldn't go anymore. And it did create what I thought was more strategic gameplay, but it didn't create, it didn't feel fun, and you had to keep track of this weird mana system. It just didn't feel very chess-like, and I say weird mana system because that's what it essentially boiled down to, is I have X amount of resource, and I use resource to do X thing, and then once I'm out for the rest of the game. And that's not a chess thing. The only real exception I can think of is like castling, because you can only do castling once a game, right? So, despite the downside of the closed board states being able to be busted open, and the pawn structure type moves that happen in the chess mirror match and some of the other heavier matchups mattering less, because with a battlefield movement you could just like go, oh, I'm just going to move my pawn forward and undouble my pawns and then support it. And sure, I have a backwards pawn now, but that's better than having doubled isolated pawns, you know? And you could even like completely fix a pawn structure that's screwed up by like a bishop taking a knight from across the board. And it also allows armies that want the board to open it up more. Like, it's hard to maintain a closed position when all of a sudden a pawn can move sideways and tear apart the structure. And the fact that it is limited just to that battlefield matters a lot, and it still creates some interesting scenarios, but it turns out that the best solution is just a simple one. We don't want to add more complexity than we already have to add to let Shogi Chess and Shang-Chi fight each other in the same game. That's already hard enough. We don't need to be adding bullshit mana systems just to maintain pawn structure strategy, all right? But of course, I had to try. I had to like really make something else work, because the truth of the matter is we hadn't tried anything else, and weigh the options. There was like one other solution that could have worked, but it was, I don't know, it just didn't feel as good. It was to allow battlefield movements either in the columns that weren't complete, right? So if you're playing on one of the 9 wide games against an 8 wide game, or even if you end up placed skewed, any column that doesn't reach the back rank of the enemy's territory therefore would have the sideways movements. Or alternatively, that and it be a battlefield square. So those columns on the battlefield, then you get the movement. And yeah, that's more limited, but it turns out that battlefield movements just kind of work. So we're not going to break it. We're not going to try to fix it. It just is, and we're just going to have to let Titans Battalion have a little bit of room to breathe on that one. Why always have reinforcements? So, for the past month, 3 weeks, I don't know, we were trying an experiment to see if we could achieve the proper game feel of the weaker armies by completely toning things down in the matchups. And it kind of worked. It seemed like this catch-all solution would save our ability to maintain Shang-Chi within Titans Battalion, Shogi within Titans Battalion, and Chess within Titans Battalion. But it turned out that we didn't maintain anything. We just made every army feel drastically different in every matchup you play it. And you basically, any skills and principles you learn from one matchup aren't going to apply to any of the others. And we have always, up until this point, allowed mirror matches to not have reinforcements. I think we've lost more than we gained. We made some of our matchups much sharper because you had fewer defenders to deal with the core parts of certain armies. Twin Suns versus Shang-Chi comes to mind. And it didn't happen to actually fix the game feel all that much. We altered the game feel for sure, but it wasn't achieving the goals that I wanted it to. Maybe I've given up on it too early, but I don't think having massive gaps of material for the same army among different matchups is a good thing. And therefore we are relatively going to be returning every army to a mostly similar reinforcement state. That doesn't mean that we are having the exact same reinforcements in every matchup. We are still going to keep the current reinforcement rules as a way to fix really problematic matchups, like Shang-Chi versus Shogi, Shang-Chi versus Twin Suns, Shogi versus Frost Beasts. All of these individual matchups will need a different amount of material than is normal, but I want them to all be close. Because having to balance a few dozen different, it's 100, right? There's 10 matchups for each army, and there's 10 armies, including the one with itself, where we would be balancing 100 variants within this game. We're still doing that, but now we're not also trying to get their game feel right. We're trying to bring it all to a baseline. This does mean we are, for the most part, giving up on having pure game feel from these games. We're trying to give them the respect they deserve and not alter their core layout as much as we can, but we will give them the tools they need to compete, and we will give them the tools that play the most fun on top of keeping their core layout, their original layout, as intact as possible. So the really, really weak Guardian Lions, where they only go to that second rank, yeah, we're keeping those, even though they aren't a Shang-Chi piece. And I think we're going to re-examine and look back at things like the Shang-Chi Dragon. If we want, we can actually just keep the Shang-Chi army with the horse, the chariot, and the cannon. This also means that we're going to be trying less hard to maintain endgame stalemate things things. We're just going to try to get it to be equal for the win-loss ratio between the two armies. But if the army has a really, really high stalemate ratio, we're just kind of going to accept that that is a natural result of that matchup, and it will affect meta decisions on what army you pick. Of course, it might become a problem later that we have to address, but for now we're going to set that to the side and not try to get everything perfect, because we can't get it perfect. We're doing a lot. Yeah. In here, I also sat down and justified perpetual check is illegal. This section was already in the rulebook. I've just toned it down and included it in the notes from the author section. I reiterated the discussion of stalemate. It's kind of already discussed inside the stalemate rule itself. So pull from both of these if you want to try to pick apart my argument for it, but I think I well covered why we have two different stalemate rules and when they apply. And then I went into this long, drawn-out thing about why we included these particular armies in the game. Including eventually removing comments on the technical amount of monies that Frostbeast alone has fundraised for us. If we're being entirely honest, like, Frostbeast has sold people on like 30% of the company in total amount bought. It's ridiculous. Of course, there's more to it than that. They were also investing in me specifically, the idea of the business, the pitch itself. But there is an argument you could make that Frostbeast being in the game fundraised the company like 35 grand. So it is what it is. And then I talked about some of the other armies I would like to include, like Asian chess, and these four specific ones. Don't worry about the crab that. Don't worry about the common nut crab. Yeah, everything's fine. Yeah. So that's it. That's where my head's at. I'm going to type all this back up tonight. It's a full reversal of the last set of changes, essentially. And it just took the experiment for me to actually be confident in what it is that I'm trying to do. Because we can try all we want to fully capture the game feel of all of these games, but the only one that we're going to be able to capture properly is the one we set as the balanced baseline, and that one is chess. Only chess gets to stay intact because we set it as the balanced baseline, unfortunately. And it's the strongest one, and it's a really solid defense structure. Like, every piece is covered. It makes sense from a lot of different perspectives, other than to treat it as the balanced baseline. But and shit, even that one, we the battlefield movements fucks with that. All right, that's it from me for today. This one should have much better audio than normal. I still have to go through and update 10 different battalion documents now. So that's going to be fun. Oh well, at least I saved a bunch of stuff. Also, the ramparts rule being baked into the core and implemented with reinforcements. I think that was a pretty big advancement, and it's sticking around after this because it's a really useful tool to have when we're trying to do fine-tune balance. I just wish battlefield charges didn't feel so terrible, and that having such different reinforcements in every matchup didn't feel bad to me personally. It might be because, like, it's so drastically different than the other way that we were trying to do things, but generally speaking, the main philosophy for Titans Battalion going forward, especially thinking about the regional variants we've included, I think this is the important part, right? Yeah. The main balance philosophy and game design philosophy is to include the armies with as much respect to them as we can give, but give every army close to maximum respect on its own. Like, no army can sit there and like tear the other ones apart. We can add stuff, but I don't want to subtract from anything, if that makes sense. And that method will, we have proven through time, does trend towards balance. As long as we're allowing ourselves a little bit of leeway for problematic matchups. Because we've done it before, and we'll do it again. Gosh. I don't know if any of that just made sense. I hope so. Anyways, one take, Andy. I am going to upload this now. I hope everybody has a lovely day.